President Stephen, fellow Rotarians, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. The information in the bulletin just gives a little play on it, and I'm not going to try to expand on it because I don't even know what he's done in his life except tech. But he's found beer late in life. I found it earlier in life. When and Bellevue Brewing came online in late 2012. And at the opening night, I was one of the founders of the Mug Club, not of the investors. And so, but I've been enjoying their beer since then. It started out with one oatmeal stout, and now it's a lot more. So come on out and enjoy it. But in the meantime, enjoy James Whittaker.
So I have been in tech for a while, and former colleagues, Michael at Microsoft, Jeffrey at Google. In fact, when I was a director at Google, I hired Jeffrey. He's now a director at Google. So if I hire anybody into my brewery, you will one day own the thing, clearly. So I bought this brewery by accident. That's part of the story. But, you know, I'm here to talk about beer. So would anybody like to guess what is the most consumed beverage on this planet? It's water. But having said water, the second most consumed beverage is tea, actually, and beer is third. Beer is also the oldest alcoholic beverage, most scholars think. No one can prove it. But as it turns out, grains were easier to store than fruits, right? Fruit is what makes wine. Fruit is what makes cider. Beer is made out of grains. Beer is fermented on starch, whereas all of those other lesser alcoholic drinks are fermented on sugars. And grain was harvested and transported by hunter-gatherer societies for at least 15,000 years ago that we know about. The first actual beer was probably an accident. It was probably this storage of grain. Some of it had gotten wet, maybe a little rancid, and wild yeast happened to grow. They ate it because they were hungry and got messed up and loved it. And ever since then, it has been used, and there's lots of archaeological proof of this. This is ancient Palestine, where the Roquefort Caves, it's called, in what is now modern-day Israel. And the beer that they dug out here and analyzed, chemically, was probably a gruel. Many of the first beers were probably like a porridge-type substance that was used in ritual feasting. And, you come back from the hunt and you quaff down some gruel. It wasn't until much later in China that there was evidence of liquid beer. Now, this beer wasn't recognizable as beer by modern tastes. It was some sort of grain, maybe corn, maybe rice, maybe oats. Most beer is made out of malted barley these days, although some of those other ingredients still end up, Ross mentioned our oatmeal stout, as subsidiary grains, but primarily it's malted barley. It wouldn't have been recognizable to modern palates. Instead of being flavored with hops, it was probably flavored with some kind of local herb, or, dirt. It was probably quite dirty. And the importance of beer throughout history cannot possibly be doubted. Many of the first writings of the, oldest 100 tablets, most of them talk about beer. Beer was so important that when you could finally figure out how to write something down, you wrote down the recipe for beer. In fact, the ancient Mesopotamians, they created nursery rhymes out of recipes for beer. It's called the Hymn to Ninkasi. Ninkasi was the Mesopotamian goddess of beer. And kids would sing it just like, we sing the Pledge of Allegiance and Jack Be Nimble. So they'd remember the damn thing. This is an almost completely illiterate society. So when literacy began, first thing we wrote down were recipes for beer. So you wine drinkers, I'm sorry. You all rank at number 7 on the most drunk beverage, the most popular beverage. I'm sorry, it's okay. One of these days you can graduate. In olden times, beer was considered to be part of the baking process, right? You worked with grains, you baked bread, you made beer too. And so you saw most of the beer evidence that we found was also next to bread and pots to bake bread and stoves to bake bread, etc. And it was so important that every single religion has some sort of patron saint of beer. This is St. Arnold, the Catholic patron saint of beer. And every little offshoot of Roman Catholicism, Lutheranism, etc., they all have their own patron saints of beer. It was so important, so much a part of their religious identity that they had to have a patron saint for it. Beer is mentioned in all of the old texts. It's mentioned in the Code of Hammurabi. It's mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's mentioned in the Bible, both pro and con. I have a T-shirt with the Psalms verse that celebrates beer. This is, in fact, Ninkasi, the ancient Mesopotamian goddess of beer. So beer has been around longer than any other alcoholic beverage. We consumed vast quantities of it. Every culture has a different type of beer. When you say German beer, that means something. The Germans are famous for using only 4 ingredients. The beer is always local in Germany, so that, Kolsch beer from Cologne and Alt beer from Dortmund, they all have their own local flavors. Eastern Europe, celebrations of beer where they don't serve it out of kegs, they serve it out of these vast serving tanks that we'll talk about in a minute. And then along came hops. Hops were first mentioned in the year 852 by Hildegard of Bingen. It was the first, we're sure that hops were used for many hundreds, maybe even thousands of years before that, because the addition of hops into beer just makes it magical. But in the beginning, it preserved it. You would put hops in the beer and it would last a lot longer. And this opened up beer to export, where you could take it across state lines. In fact, IPA, India Pale Ale, was beer that the English hopped so much that it would survive the journey from England all the way around Africa to India, where their colonies were. Now, this was pretty important because it was really difficult to get sailors to sign up for a ship going to India, knowing that the beer would run out by the time they got to Spain. Once the beer, they could put enough in the ships got bigger. There's a lot of evidence to show that the size of the ships grew when they could transport more beer. It's that important to society. Which brings us to more modern times. Not only was beer recipes the very first thing that we wrote down when we figured out how to write shit down, it was also the first thing we photographed when we figured out how to make a photograph where the exposure time was less than 2 or 3 minutes. And that was in the late 1800s. And this is the first picture, the first known photo of people drinking a beer. Now, these 3 gentlemen, this was taken in Edinburgh, Scotland, these 3 gentlemen probably had to hold that pose for this exposure to take place. This was a technological advance. Exposure times were in the tens of minutes before these new cameras came out in right around 1842, and this was one place that they experimented on it. Innovation follows beer. I'm commissioning a painting of this to put into our new pub, which brings us to Bellevue Brewing Company. Now, my own journey with beer started when I was a graduate student at the University of Tennessee. And I went to a professor's house who, of course, had more money than me. I was a graduate student. And he had a beer there called Sam Adams Boston Lager. I had never experienced anything like this in my life. I grew up in Kentucky where the beer was thin and gross and cost $3 a case. We used to go and fill milk jugs out of kegs. This is how irreverent we were with the beer we consumed. The idea was to drink as much as possible, as fast as possible, and forget what you made on your exams last week. This Boston Lager was a revelation. For the first time in my young life, I found myself sipping a beer rather than chugging it. And I finally found it at the store. It was 5 times the price of Natural Light, which is what I was buying before. I saved up and I bought it and sipped it. And then I started dating this girl who happened to be English, and she took me to England. And this shit was everywhere. Good beer was all over the place. Every single pub had a beautiful, dark, hand-pulled ale. And I thought, this is what civilization feels like. This is what people who love each other drink. And so I got home from that trip and I started brewing my own beer. I bought a little kit, found a little homebrew shop. The first batch of beer was 5 gallons of awful, but I drank it anyhow for motivation for the second batch, which was a little bit better and a little bit better. And I got to the point where I hosted a taste test with 2 beers. One was mine and the other was Samuel Adams Boston Lager. And nobody could tell the difference. And so I had mastered this art of brewing, moved to Florida where I still couldn't find, was a professor down in Florida, still couldn't find a decent beer to drink. I continued to brew. My tanks got a little bit bigger and a little bit better. And then I moved out here. And when I moved out here, I took all of my homebrew equipment and sold it because we have really good beer out here. I moved in early 2000s, and I couldn't brew anything like Red Hook and Pyramid and Hales and all of the kind of original breweries of this area. In fact, one's even called Ninkasi, which is the Mesopotamian goddess of ale. And so I stopped brewing, and so I started drinking at breweries. And every brewery I went to, I'd get a flight, right? 4-ounce pour. First 4 beers, just give me 4 ounces of each one. And I'd sip it, and every brewery I'd ever been to, I'd like 1, maybe 2 of those. Until I went to Bellevue Brewing Company, probably in around, I don't know, we're open a couple years before I found you, and I liked all 4 of them. And I thought, this has never happened before. What a happy place this is. So I ordered 4 more. And I liked all 4 of those. And I ordered 4 more, and they said, well, we don't have 4 more. They think we only had like 10 beers on at the time. So I said, all right, well, just give me the last 2, and I like those as well. And I thought, all right, this is my home. And right in the corner of this little bar in an industrial area of Bellevue, I wrote 2 books. Thanks for giving me a copy of yours today. I made him buy copies of mine, so anyhow. And then one day I'm in there writing on this book, and the owner came in, John Robertson. Maybe some of you knew him, kind of a larger-than-life character. And he pulls up a bar stool a few feet down from me and starts looking at spreadsheets. He didn't seem to be particularly happy. Now, I'd seen this gentleman before, but I never really talked to him. But he didn't seem particularly happy. So we had a conversation. Turns out he had a large bank loan. I'm thinking it was from that guy maybe we were talking to earlier. It's just a guess. I'm not sure. Really high interest rate. It was him, wasn't it? It was totally him. It's totally him. And the brewery was struggling. And I thought, I'm not yet finished with my second book. This place can't close. So John and I started hanging out. I realized I really liked this guy. I really liked his vision. And I wrote a check to pay off his bank loan and charging the same interest that I got from my line of credit. Happy, happy. All is well. He's saving tons of money, and I'm making a tiny bit. And then, unfortunately, in 2017, John suddenly passed away. We celebrated his, I'm sorry to bring the mood down a little bit, but we celebrated his birthday, 50th birthday on a Friday, and he died of a brain aneurysm the following Monday. And so, once again, Bellevue Brewing needed saving. When you lose a larger-than-life, charismatic, life of the party, brain of the business, it's a tough thing to overcome. And so I started digging into the books with John's widow, Angie. Angie, say hi to everybody. And we both, realized a great desire to save this place and not just to close it down because John was gone. And a funny thing happened when we started looking at the books is that if I convert my loan to equity, you won't have to pay me anymore. That was the good news for Angie. If I convert my loan to equity, I own as much of this shit as you do. And so that's what happened, and Angie and I became business partners and have been running Bellevue Brewing ever since. Now, one of my big beefs about the beer industry, not only in Bellevue but in this area, is that they tend to be tucked away in these little corners of our towns and cities and industrial areas that a lot of families don't really feel all that comfortable going to. We're in a pretty nice part of Bellevue, but I can't say that about many of our competitors. Now, when we started out in these little areas, you end up having to spend a lot of money. And a lot of breweries don't have a lot of money, including ours. So you take a space, I think our place over on 130th Street used to be a office supply store or something like that. And it cost us a lot of money to build it into, kind of what it is today. These are the first tanks that we purchased. These were, I think these were 20-barrel fermenters. We're now in 40-barrel fermenters and bright tanks. This was the brew house equipment over here, right? All this is hot, and all that is beer that has been brewed and is put in the fermenters, and the magic happens, right? The yeast consumes the starches and the grains and farts out alcohol and CO2. So a lot of the gas you get in a beer is completely generated naturally by yeast and starch and sugars. We've grown a lot more now. If you come over, I'd be happy to give you a quick tour of our brewery. We could probably brew about 400 barrels. So a barrel is 100 liters a year. Now we can do about 2,200 barrels a year, and we run out every year, so keep being thirsty. And this is what the tanks look like on what is called a rigger. The rigger delivers them and installs them. And another really expensive process the city of Bellevue doesn't really understand, because they are so confused by it, they have to keep coming out and charging us for inspection after inspection after inspection. And eventually it ends up in a glass, and that's probably, Ross, the beer you drank on our opening day. And another source of frustration for us brewers is you get your occupancy license. They won't give you your occupancy license until your restaurant's ready to open. An occupancy license doesn't mean you have beer. You need to be brewing months and months and months before you actually open to the public so that you have something to serve them. We had 3 weeks, and the only thing you can brew in 3 weeks is a stout. That's the fastest brewing beer. Now you know why Guinness is so popular, because you can just crank it out. And now you've probably heard we are moving. By the way, we generate crowds too. This is why people like breweries in their cities. There are places in Europe that don't consider you a city unless you have a brewery that takes on the name of the city. So if we were in Europe, you all would be a proper city in Bellevue because of us. You can't be a country without an airline, but that's the Europeans. Those are their rules. And so it generates a lot of traffic for surrounding businesses as well. So now maybe you've heard that we are moving in, and of course, tap room's full. This is probably a 9-year-old photograph of one of the first times our tap room filled up, and look at that, they're watching the Seahawks. Seahawks are a team that used to be good. Do you all remember them? Okay, just checking. You may have heard that we are moving now to the Spring District of Bellevue. Now, this is kind of a first for a brewery, not only in this county, but in all the neighboring counties, of a brewery existing in a walkable, kind of downtown-ish area of a city. This is a first. Lots of breweries recorded for this area. Many of the, the big, we were the first local brewery. Rock Bottom was the first brewery in Bellevue. You may have remembered them. It's a Texas-based chain. They closed years ago, and nothing's opened in their place because it's not easy to open a brewery here. This is the second one that we've opened here, and we can attest it's not easy and it's expensive. There are fees everywhere. This place was designed by someone who knew nothing about breweries. We've had to dig out the floor, redo everything to make it a brewery. For some reason, they thought it would be a great idea to put the beer garden off the brewery instead of the restaurant. Turns out that's not a great idea. Ask the waitstaff who has to go up and down this stairway, to deliver food. We have to go outside and through the brewery to deliver drinks to the outside area. But we figured it out. We've made do. And an interesting thing happened when we leased this space at the Spring District. The rest of the retail filled up immediately. There was no retail here. It's a small little sandwich shop put in there for free, no rent, in order to feed the construction workers. We were the second that moved in, and then it filled up. This is the magic of breweries. People seek us out. Some of the most searched for terms on Google for travelers have to do with breweries near me when they go to new towns and new cities. And I'm quite proud that Bellevue Brewing is the first to really occupy a walkable downtown area. I predict we will be the last in Bellevue because there isn't any more space. And it's really risky to rent, to lease, and not own a place where you have to spend all of this money digging out the floors, figuring out the plumbing, figuring out how to get rid of your wastewater and treat your wastewater, put in all those big tanks, get them seismically tested. It's too much almost for a leased building. We're taking a huge risk here, so please come and spend your money. But don't think I wasn't tempted. And so, restaurant and brewery, about 2,300 of it, this back end. You can go and look in the windows now. You'll see Bellevue Brewing signs. You'll see the floors dug out and all the plumbing installed under the concrete. I think we're repouring the floors today, and now you'll see walls go up. We're going to have a full-service kitchen in here. If you've come to our current brewery, how many of y'all have been to our current brewery? Oh. Thank you, all of you. I think it's pretty much almost every hand in the house. Now, this is a secret that I'll tell you. We have no grill, and we have no fryer. That tiny little kitchen that we have in that brewery, everything's baked. You don't know it, but the real bakes place is our little kitchen. We're going to have a full kitchen. I cannot wait to see what Chef Cesar does with, the $600,000 worth of, every time I say that, I got to pay for it, equipment that we're putting in this place. This is going to be by far the nicest beer garden. This is 2,500 square feet of beer garden. It overlooks a park with water features that kids can play in, a garden, an edible garden. I don't know if the food department will allow us to use any of it to cook, but it looks great. And then the front part of it will be a 6,000 square foot restaurant with a higher end build, like this, right? A nice, really nice place that is going to trying to bring back the city center brewery and make it a really comfortable place for friends and families to come and enjoy themselves. And we're doing something that is a first on the entire West Coast because seismically it's hard. I worked at Google and Microsoft. I like hard problems. We had T-shirts printed at Google while I was there that said something about, Jeffrey, maybe you still have one, something about, I have a healthy disrespect for the impossible. And when I first looked at serving tanks, right, so these are 1,000 liter, this is 20 times the size of an ordinary keg of beer, 1,000 liters. Now, the cool thing about these 1,000 liters is you pump beer into a Mylar bladder inside this, and the beer stays fresh. No extra CO2 required. You're only getting the natural CO2 that results from yeast eating starches and sugars in the grains. So it's the healthiest, greenest beer you can drink. You got to go to Denver to find one of these right now. We installed 10 of these, copper clad. They will be hanging over our bar. I dare you to find another place around here where you can do this. And I dare anyone else to figure out how to seismically get by with it with the city inspectors. We did the math on this and figured it out. So there's going to be 10 of these hanging over the bar. It's going to be the freshest, cleanest beer. If you find that beer gives you a headache, there's two things that could cause that. One, you drank too much damn beer. And number two, impurities in the beer itself. There will be none of that. This beer will last. It'll be literally like sneaking into our brewery, laying down and turning on the tap on the bright tank right into your mouth. It's going to be the freshest beer in town. And now I'm a little worried about our place on 130th. I know I'm out of time. I'm wrapping up here. I'm a little worried about our place on 130th because, we lease it. We got a lot of expensive equipment in there, and all the buildings around us are being redeveloped, retail on the bottom, multifamily on top, and so we sort of live in fear with, giving a notice, and that's where the future of beer in Bellevue comes. There might not be, except our little pub in the Spring District, because there are no buildings we can buy or lease for long term to risk doing this. And a funny thing happened on the way to this podium. I've got meetings with the city of Everett, Linwood, Tacoma, Tukwila. There's one more, and I can't think of it off the top of my head, all courting us to build our next brewery in their city. So if anyone knows about any way that we could work with you all to figure out how to keep breweries in Bellevue, then be more than happy to talk about it.
When do you open?
Well, February 22nd was what our contractor told us, but it's looking more like April 14th at the moment. I can tell you when we have to start paying rent, but for right now we've hit a bunch of just slowdowns. Cities slow with permitting, they're slow with inspections, and now we're beginning to look at some supply chain issues that you read about at the ports to get the equipment. So I'm hoping it will be in April. We'll have a couple of soft openings where we invite our investors and our regulars and our landlord and our bankers, et cetera, except not that guy. And then we'll have a grand opening sometime then, and we'll be open for the summer hours, which should pay for a lot of the expenses that we've had over the last 2 years figuring all this out. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, guys.
All right. Well, James, before you completely leave the stage here, I wanted to let you know that as a gesture of appreciation for your talk today, we've donated 3/4 of a ton of food to Harvest Against Hunger, which will provide fresh produce to local food banks for that purpose. We also have a commemorative Bellevue Inspiration Playground mug for you, something to, I think will also hold beer.